I don't usually camp alone, but that weekend I really needed it. Things were getting too loud back home. Work was stressful. My phone wouldn't stop ringing, and I had been feeling stuck for months. I kept telling myself I just needed a few days to breathe, away from everyone and everything. I wanted to go where there was no signal, no noise, and nobody I had to answer to. That's how I ended up driving out to a place in the mountains I had saved on my maps over a year ago but never visited. It was a spot near an old abandoned fire tower deep in the national forest. I'd seen it in a hiking blog and marked it as a maybe one-day spot. It wasn't exactly a campground, just a flat clearing in the woods with the old tower nearby. The post said the tower was still standing but fenced off, too unstable to climb. I didn't care about that. I wasn't going to climb anything. I just liked how far away it was. The dirt road that led there was rough and slow, and I figured most people wouldn't want to bother. That's exactly what I wanted. I packed up my small tent, some canned food, my propane stove, my water jug, a hunting knife I always brought when alone, and my basic gear. I left early Saturday morning and made good time. Once I hit the gravel road, I drove another 45 minutes uphill through thick woods, passing nothing but trees and rocks. I only saw one other vehicle, a white pickup parked off to the side about 2 miles from the tower. No one inside, no one around. Probably hunters or hikers. I didn't think much of it. By the time I reached the clearing, it was close to 3 in the afternoon. The place looked just like the photos. Flat open space surrounded by thick trees, with the metal fire tower rising about 80 feet into the sky at the far end. Rusted, bent in spots, with a locked gate around the base and a sign that said, "Danger, keep out." I parked my car near the treeline, got out, stretched, and just stood there listening to the silence. No wind, no birds, no people. Just the creak of the tower's metal frame and the occasional snap of a twig from some squirrel or deer. I set up camp right in the middle of the clearing, with the fire tower behind me about 100 yards away. It was dead quiet. Too quiet, maybe, but I told myself I was just used to city noise. I built a small fire ring from stones, gathered some dead branches, and made a small fire even though it was still light out. I like hearing the crackle of firewood. It helps me relax. By sunset, I'd eaten, cleaned up, and was sitting on a camp chair watching the sky go orange behind the trees. It was peaceful. I didn't check my phone. I already knew there was no signal. The sky went dark fast once the sun dipped behind the hills, and I sat by the fire for a while until I got cold enough to crawl into my sleeping bag. The next morning, I woke up early, made coffee, and walked toward the fire tower just to check it out. The metal frame looked worse up close. Paint peeled off in big flakes, and the stairs were bent in places. The fence had a big gap in it. Someone had definitely gone inside before, but I didn't plan on doing that. I just walked around it looking up through the trees. The sky was bright blue, and the only sounds were distant birds and the wind picking up through the leaves. I noticed some boot prints in the dirt near the base of the tower. That's not unusual. Like I said, people probably came here sometimes. But these prints looked fresh. The soil was dry, but there was enough dust to catch the edges of a print, and I could see the sole clearly in a few spots. They weren't mine. Mine had a cross pattern. These had thick vertical bars on the heel and circular dots across the toe. Work boots, maybe. Not super recent, but not more than a couple days old. I didn't really think much of it. Just made a note in my head. I spent most of that Sunday walking some of the nearby game trails. There were a few narrow paths cutting through the trees, probably made by deer or the occasional hiker. I didn't go too far, maybe a mile out and back. The weather was nice, and I had a full bottle of water. I took some photos of trees and moss and a fallen log with mushrooms growing along it. When I got back to camp around 2 p.m., I noticed something strange. There was a footprint, right near the fire pit. The same kind of print I'd seen near the tower, vertical heel lines and round dots at the toes. Only one, but it was pointed toward my tent. Not the other way. My own tracks were around, too, of course, but this one stood out. It was clearer, sharper. It hadn't been there when I left. That's when I felt something shift in my gut. I looked around. No one. I walked the edge of the clearing. Nothing. I even shouted once, just a simple hello, even though I didn't want to talk to anyone. There was no answer. I stood still for a long time, just listening. Eventually, I convinced myself it was probably nothing. Maybe I missed it earlier. Maybe I stepped there and didn't notice. But I still took my knife out of my pack and kept it clipped to my belt the rest of the day. That night, I didn't sleep well. I kept waking up, thinking I'd heard something. Small noises, snaps, maybe wind. I unzipped my tent around 2 a.m. and just sat there, staring into the dark woods. The fire was long dead. There was no moon. I couldn't see anything beyond the edge of my camp. I held the flashlight in one hand and the knife in the other, but I didn't turn the light on. I didn't want to make myself a target. I stayed there for almost half an hour before I crawled back into my bag and just laid awake until sunrise. The next morning, I found more tracks. They were close, maybe 5 feet from my tent. Same pattern. They came from the woods, circled behind my tent, and disappeared back into the trees. I checked everywhere. I walked in a wide circle, scanning the dirt, the moss, even patches of grass. I didn't see anything else. No gear, no trash, no broken branches, no sign of where they went. I started packing up right then. I didn't care that it was only Monday morning. I was done. It wasn't fear exactly. It was more like a growing pressure in my chest. That feeling when you know something is off but you can't prove it. Like someone breathing down your neck even though no one's there. By the time I had everything loaded in the car, I was sweating even though it was only 60 degrees out. I did one last sweep of the clearing, walked over to the tower, looked around, and then got in and shut the door. The engine wouldn't start. I turned the key again. Nothing. Lights came on, but no sound. No crank. Just the soft click of the relay. I checked the battery terminals. They were fine. Not corroded, not loose. I tried again. Nothing. I sat there in silence, trying not to panic. I told myself it was a starter issue. Maybe a fuse. Maybe the ignition switch. I had jumper cables, but no one to jump from. I had a spare battery pack for emergencies, but it only worked for phones and small gear. My phone was still dead anyway. I had to hike out. I took my knife, my flashlight, and a full water bottle. I locked the car and started walking back down the road, hoping I'd reach someone within 5 or 6 miles. I passed the fire tower, past the old trails, and just kept walking. I tried not to think about anything, just one step after another. About 2 miles in, I saw the white pickup again. It was parked in the exact same spot as before. Still empty, still silent. But now there was something strange. Mud on the driver's side door, fresh and streaked like someone had wiped it with their sleeve. There was also a pile of small bones near the front tire. Not animal bones like chicken bones, picked clean and left in a neat little stack. I didn't touch anything. I didn't even slow down. I walked right past it and kept going. Half an hour later, I heard something behind me. It was soft like gravel shifting. I stopped and listened. Nothing. Then again, a crunch, closer this time. I turned around fast. The road was empty. My heart was pounding in my ears. I crouched low behind a tree and waited. And that's when I saw him. He stepped out from the woods onto the road, maybe 60 yards behind me. A man, thin, wearing a brown jacket and jeans. He wasn't walking fast, just moving slow and steady in the same direction I'd been going. Toward me. He didn't call out. He didn't wave. He didn't look surprised to see me. He just kept walking. I backed up into the trees and moved off the road. I crouched low and waited. He didn't speed up, didn't turn, didn't even glance side to side. Just kept walking. I stayed there for 15 minutes after he passed. My hands were shaking. When I finally moved again, I didn't go back to the road. I cut through the trees, heading downhill, trying to find a different way out. I didn't care about trails anymore. I just wanted to get to the main highway. I walked for hours. I fell twice. My legs got scraped up from branches and thorns. Around 3 p.m., I heard cars. Real ones. Distant at first, then louder. I pushed through until I saw the highway. I practically rolled down the last hill and came out onto the shoulder, covered in dirt and leaves. The first car that passed didn't stop. The second one did. It was an older couple driving a red SUV. They didn't ask many questions, just looked at me, wide-eyed, and said, "Get in." They drove me 10. I wasn't the kind of guy who did crazy trips or lived outdoors. I liked quiet, I liked nature, and most of all, I liked being alone. So when I finally took a week off work after months of stress, I knew I had to get away from the city. The noise, the lights, the constant movement, I was tired of it. I wanted a place where I could hear nothing but wind and my own breathing. I had camped before, but not often and never this deep. This trip was different. I wanted no roads nearby, no people, just me and the woods. I picked a location that wasn't even on most basic maps. It was a flat area of forest in the northern part of the state, not too far from a lake. I found it through an old online forum post from someone who talked about perfect seclusion. It wasn't a tourist spot, and the trails leading in were faint and narrow. From what I read, there were no cabins, no rangers, and barely any signs of other people. I had to drive a few hours north, then take a gravel logging road that curved for miles through woods before I could even get close to the start of the hike. I packed carefully. My backpack was heavy: food, tent, sleeping bag, extra clothes, knife, compass, flashlight, batteries, power bank, waterproof matches, and a paper map. I didn't bring my phone except to use it for offline GPS if needed, and I had no plans to use it otherwise. I even brought bear spray, even though I hadn't seen a bear in my life. It felt good to be prepared. It was mid-September when I drove up. The trees had just started turning color, and the temperature was dropping, especially at night. By the time I reached the start of the trail, it was already late afternoon. I hiked about 2 hours before I stopped and set up camp just before the sun dipped behind the trees. The clearing I found was flat and dry, tucked between tall pines and about 30 feet from a small stream that made a quiet trickling sound. Felt perfect. That first night, I slept well. The air was cool but not freezing. I woke up a few times, more out of habit than anything, but all I heard was the soft wind and a few owls in the distance. No bugs, no distant cars, no people. Just trees and sky. The second day, I hiked further in with a day pack, just exploring. I marked my trail with bright orange tape I tied to branches and carved small notches into tree bark to make sure I could find my way back. The woods were dense but walkable, with the ground covered in soft pine needles. I found some deer tracks, a few squirrels, and once I spotted what I think was a fox darting between trees. By the time I returned to camp that evening, I was sore but happy. I cooked some beans and rice over my portable stove, then sat by the dying light, writing in my notebook and sipping instant coffee. I couldn't remember the last time I felt that relaxed. That peace started to shift the next day. It began with small things. In the morning, I woke up to find my gear shifted around. My boots, which I had left right by the flap of my tent, were a few feet away. One was knocked over. I thought maybe I had moved them without thinking, or maybe an animal nudged them during the night. But they were heavy boots, and they'd been under the flap. It felt odd. I checked for tracks but didn't find anything. I shrugged it off and didn't give it much more thought. Later that day, I went exploring again, heading further south through thicker forest. The ground started to slope downward, and I noticed that the trees grew closer together the deeper I went. It was quiet, more quiet than usual. No birds, no rustling, not even wind through the branches. I only realized the stillness after I had already walked for maybe 30 minutes. It felt like something was watching, though I didn't hear or see anything. It wasn't fear exactly, but something colder, like being stared at through a wall. I turned back early. I kept checking behind me as I walked, and I found myself pausing to listen, thinking I'd heard a branch snap or leaves crunch. But every time I stopped, it was just silence. When I got back to camp, I double-checked my stuff. I made sure my food was sealed in a bear bag and hung from a tree branch. I made sure my knife was next to my sleeping bag. That night, I zipped the tent fully shut and kept my flashlight close to hand. Around midnight, I woke up suddenly. Not from a dream, not from cold, just snapped awake like someone had shaken me. I didn't move at first. I lay there, eyes open, ears straining. I thought I heard something outside. Slow movement, something brushing against the side of the tent. I held my breath. Whatever it was didn't make noise like an animal rooting around. It was quieter, controlled. almost like someone moving on purpose, trying not to make sound but still shifting just enough that I could hear the faint pressure on the tent wall. I didn't move. I didn't say anything. I just lay still, knife in my hand, waiting. The sound stopped after maybe 30 seconds. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, the side of the tent had a faint smudge on it. A streak of mud, or dirt, or maybe oil. Couldn't tell. It didn't look like an animal had clawed it. There were no punctures, just a smear. I decided not to hike that day. I stayed around camp, checking everything again, watching the woods. I sat in a small patch of sun and stared at the trees, trying to convince myself I was being paranoid. But there was something about the way the woods felt now. Not peaceful, not natural, just off. That evening, just before dark, I thought I saw something through the trees. About 60 yards away, something moved between the trunks. It wasn't big, just a dark shape. I only saw it for a second before it vanished behind a pine. I stood up, heart racing, staring into the woods. Nothing moved after that. I walked over there slowly, gripping my knife tight. I looked around the trees but didn't find anything. No tracks, no movement, just stillness. I slept badly again that night. I heard more movement outside the tent. Twice. Each time it came from a different side. I didn't unzip it. I just held the knife and stayed quiet. The next morning, I decided to leave. I didn't care if it cut the trip short. Something wasn't right. I didn't feel safe anymore. I started packing fast, rolling up my tent, stuffing things into my pack without order. I felt rushed, like I needed to get out quickly. Just before I left, I found something tied to a tree near the stream. It was made of sticks, 5 short pieces tied together into a shape like a star or a crude symbol. It hadn't been there before. It was hanging from twine, handmade, not old, not weathered. I didn't touch it. I just stared at it for a minute, then turned and started hiking. I kept checking behind me as I moved through the woods. I walked fast, not running, but close. I followed the orange tape markers I had left. For the first half hour, everything looked normal. Then I found one of the markers ripped off and lying on the ground. The tape had been torn, not cut. Torn hard with frayed ends. I didn't stop to figure out why. Another hour in, I realized I didn't recognize some parts of the trail. The trees looked similar, but the landmarks were off. A rock I had marked with an arrow was gone. A broken stump I used as a turn point wasn't where it should have been. I had the map, but even then I started second-guessing myself. The forest started to blur together, endless green, brown, gray. At one point, I swore I heard someone ahead of me, footsteps crunching leaves. But when I stopped, it stopped. I didn't call out. I didn't move forward for a long time. I just waited. Eventually, I started walking again, not sure if I was even on the right path. By the time I found the gravel logging road, it was late afternoon. I had walked for hours. My legs were shaking. My pack felt like it weighed double what it did before. But I didn't stop. I kept walking until I saw my car. That's when I realized something else had been off. The car was fine. Not broken into, not scratched. But the dust on the windshield had been wiped in one small spot. A clean smear on the driver's side, like someone had pressed their hand against it or leaned in close to look inside. I unlocked the door, tossed the pack inside, and drove without stopping. I didn't turn on music. I didn't stop to eat. I just drove. I didn't tell anyone about what happened, at least not in full. I said I cut the trip short because of weather. I told myself maybe someone else had been camping nearby and was messing around. Or maybe it was just an animal. Maybe I imagined things. But even now, months later, I think about the small things that didn't make sense. The way my gear was moved, the strange symbol in the trees, the way parts of the forest seemed to shift, the quiet, the footsteps, and that handprint on the windshield. Whoever or whatever was out there, they didn't want to be seen. They didn't try to attack. They didn't try to steal. They just watched, moved things, followed me, left small signs that they were there. That was enough. I haven't gone camping since. I think about going back sometimes, just to see if I imagined it. But every time I picture that silent forest and the feeling of being watched from behind the trees, I remember how real it all felt, how close they were without ever showing themselves. And I know I'll never go back. I had been planning the trip for a while. It wasn't anything dramatic, just a simple solo camping trip. I needed it. Life had been getting too loud. I had been stuck in routines, long hours, and endless screens. My head felt full all the time. I wanted silence, just trees, sky, water, and space. I'd done some solo hikes before, but this time I wanted to go deeper into the woods. Not some crowded park where kids screamed all day and cars honked down the nearby highway. I wanted to feel like I was far away from everything, and I found the perfect spot after weeks of looking at maps and trail reviews. The place I chose was a part of an old national forest about 5 hours from where I lived. It was deep, so deep you couldn't even drive all the way in. You had to park your car near a closed service road and hike in about 6 miles. There were no designated campgrounds in that area, which meant you had to bring everything you needed. But that was fine. I packed my gear carefully: tent, sleeping bag, water filter, food for 5 days, first aid kit, knife, GPS, paper map, compass, batteries, headlamp, fire starter, everything. I left early on a Thursday morning and made good time. I reached the trailhead by around noon. I parked my car under a patch of trees near the locked gate, grabbed my pack, and started walking. The weather was calm and cool. Late spring, the kind of day that doesn't make you sweat right away but still warms your skin under the sun. The first few miles were on the old gravel service road. Overgrown in spots, washed out in others, but still passable. I saw deer tracks in the mud and heard woodpeckers hammering away somewhere up in the canopy. No other people, no tire tracks, no wrappers on the ground. It felt like it had been a while since anyone else had come out this way. After about an hour and a half, I turned off the road and took a narrow game trail that led toward a river I'd seen on the map. It wasn't a huge river, but it ran clear and steady, and I figured it would be a perfect water source. I hiked another half hour until I reached it. The trees opened a little there. On my side of the river, the ground sloped gently down toward a stony shore. Across the river, there was a thicker patch of woods and a steep ridge rising behind it. The place looked untouched. It was quiet except for the slow sound of water moving over stones and some wind shifting through the tops of the pine trees. I picked a spot near the riverbank where the ground was flat and dry, set my tent up under a tall spruce, laid out my gear, collected wood, boiled water, sat there for a while just listening and staring at the flowing water. I was finally alone. No phones, no people, no noise, just the breeze and the sound of the river. I remember feeling like I had made the right choice coming out here. It was calm. My shoulders started to relax. My breathing slowed. I watched the sun drop below the trees on the other side and went to sleep early. That first night was uneventful. Cold, but I was ready for that. I slept with my knife next to me, like I always do when I'm out in the woods alone, but nothing happened. I woke up around 3 a.m. to pee and saw the moon glowing above the river. Still not a sound but the wind. The next day was just as quiet. I explored along the river, did some fishing with a collapsible rod I brought, and even caught a small trout. I cooked it over the fire for lunch. I didn't see or hear anyone the whole day. I started to feel like I had the whole forest to myself. I liked that feeling. It made me feel small in a good way, like all the stress and pressure I carried around didn't matter out here. The world didn't care. It was just trees and time. But that night, something changed. It started with a sound, a small sound, just after I had gotten into my sleeping bag. I had the tent flap unzipped slightly so I could see the stars. The fire had burned down to just glowing coals. That's when I heard something across the river. It sounded like a footstep, not an animal rustling, not a bird flutter. It was heavier, more deliberate. It crunched on the gravel on the opposite shore. Then it stopped. I froze. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe loudly. I waited, staring through the opening in the tent, but it was too dark to see much, just shadows and trees. I listened. Another step, then another, then silence again. I waited for over an hour. Nothing else. I tried to tell myself it was a deer, maybe even a bear. but it didn't sound like either. It sounded like a person walking carefully on rocks. The next morning, I checked the riverbank across from me. I didn't see anything at first, but when I walked a little upstream, I found what looked like a shoe print in the soft mud. It wasn't clear, but it was shaped like a boot. Could have been old. Could have been from a hunter or hiker from days ago. I tried to believe that. That whole day, I kept looking over my shoulder. I didn't hike far from camp. I stayed close, gathered more firewood, and kept my knife on me. I didn't even fish. I just couldn't focus. My ears kept catching small sounds and my eyes kept scanning the trees across the river. But I never saw anything move. The air felt different, like the forest had gone quiet in a way that wasn't normal. That night, I built the fire bigger. I stayed up late next to it, just staring into the flames, listening. I didn't hear anything for hours. But then, after midnight, there it was again. A splash. A single splash like someone had stepped into the river. Then silence. Then another. Not fast. Not rushing. Just slow, one step at a time. Something or someone was crossing the river. I stood up and grabbed my flashlight. I didn't turn it on yet. I waited. The fire popped and hissed behind me. I stared into the dark across the river. I could hear the water moving. I could hear the rocks shifting under weight. But I still saw nothing. Then it stopped. I waited, heart pounding. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. Nothing. I turned on the flashlight and pointed it toward the river. It lit up the water, the shore, the trees across. Nothing there. Just the river moving like it always did. But something had crossed. I stayed up until dawn. When the sun rose, I walked along the river, both sides. I found more footprints on the other side. Clear ones this time. Human. Boot tread. Fresh. A single person. They had walked down from the trees, stepped into the water, crossed, then stepped back out. They didn't come to my side. They just crossed and stood there, watching. I don't know. I didn't know what to do. I was too far out to call anyone. No signal. I had my GPS and map. I could have packed up and left, but I told myself maybe it was just a hiker, a hunter, someone passing through. Maybe they didn't even see me, but deep down I didn't believe that. That day, I packed everything and moved my camp. I didn't go far, just about a mile downstream where the land curved and I'd be out of sight from the original spot. I didn't build a fire that night. I didn't want to be seen. I just ate cold food and stayed in the tent. That night was worse. I heard something again, not on the river this time, behind my tent, branches breaking, then silence, then soft footsteps, then nothing. I didn't sleep at all. At sunrise, I was already packed and moving. I didn't even eat. I just wanted to get out of there. I started hiking back toward the trailhead. I had about 6 miles to cover, but my pack was lighter now. I moved fast. About halfway there, I saw something. A tree, about the thickness of my arm, had been cut down and dragged into the middle of the trail. Fresh cuts, not from an animal, not from weather, deliberate, placed to slow someone down. My blood ran cold. I looked around, didn't see anyone, and stepped over it. I didn't stop again. I reached the service road in under 2 hours and followed it back to where my car was. But when I reached the spot, the car was still there, but something was wrong. The back door on the driver's side was open. I knew I had locked it. I had double-checked before I left. My glove box had been opened. My maps had been pulled out. My emergency bag had been dumped on the back seat. A knife was missing. My second flashlight, too. There were no signs of forced entry. Just opened, like someone had the time. I stood there, looking around in every direction. No movement, no sound, just trees. I threw my pack into the car and got in. I locked the doors, started the engine, and drove. I didn't stop until I hit a gas station nearly an hour away. There, I finally let myself breathe. I checked everything again. All the main gear was still there, but I didn't care. I just wanted to be gone. It's been months now. I haven't been camping since. I haven't told anyone the full story either. They wouldn't understand. They'd say it was just another hiker. Coincidence. A mix-up. But I know what I heard. I know someone was watching, following, waiting. They never said a word. They never showed themselves. But they were out there, right across the river, then behind my tent, then at my car. I don't like to say I'm the kind of person who enjoys being alone, but for a long time that was just the truth. There's something peaceful about sitting in the middle of nowhere and not hearing anything except the wind in the trees and the birds in the distance. I had gotten into camping a few years back after I moved away from the city and started working remotely. I was never one of those gearhead types who loaded up with all the fanciest stuff. I just had the basics: a good tent, a big hiking pack, a few tools, and a gas burner. I wasn't trying to win any survival competitions or prove anything to anyone. It was early autumn when I took that trip. I remember because the leaves were already starting to turn orange and yellow. There was a spot I had bookmarked online on a small map someone posted in a camping forum. It was deep into a stretch of forest about 4 hours from my house. Not a national park or anything official, just land on the edge of some logging territory that hadn't been worked in years. A winding river ran through it, and according to the guy who posted the location, the bank was perfect for pitching a tent. Said it had good flat ground and a slow-moving current, easy to boil and drink if I filtered it right. I got up early on a Friday morning, packed the car, and drove out. The first half of the trip was all paved roads, the kind where you're half asleep, following the curve of the land through one-lane towns. After a while, it turned into dirt and gravel. The road shook the car so much I thought I was going to blow a tire, but I kept going until I reached the clearing I had marked on my GPS. I left my car behind a thick group of pine trees and locked it up. I took out my pack, slung it on, and started hiking west toward the river. I'd read online it was about 2 hours in from the drop point. I took my time getting there. The forest was beautiful. It was the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're walking through someone else's dream. The light came through the trees like thin ropes, and the breeze smelled like moss and cold dirt. Every so often, I stopped to listen, just to make sure nothing was following. Not because I was scared, just cautious. You never know what you'll run into out there. By the time I made it to the river, the sun was hanging low, but I had maybe 2 hours before it would dip behind the ridge. I found the place the guy had mentioned, a flat strip of ground right next to the bend in the river. There were no signs of recent campers, no ash pits or garbage, just leaves and pine needles and a whole lot of peace. I cleared a space with my boot, set up the tent, and pulled out my little burner. I boiled some water and made dehydrated pasta. It wasn't good, but out there it felt like a 5-star meal. The air was chilly, but I had layers on and a good sleeping bag. That first night was perfect. I stayed up late, sitting on a rock by the water, just listening. No animals, no bugs, no planes overhead. I slept hard and didn't wake up once. The next morning, I made coffee and decided to go exploring upstream. I followed the edge of the river for a good hour, climbing over fallen logs and crossing a few shallow spots. I was hoping to spot some deer or maybe even a bear from a distance. I had my camera with me just in case, but all I saw were birds and squirrels. Eventually, I circled back and returned to my tent by mid-afternoon. When I got back, I noticed something strange. A small pile of stones had been placed near the corner of my tent. I was sure it hadn't been there before. 5 small rocks stacked on top of each other. They weren't natural like they had fallen like that. They were arranged carefully with the smallest on top. I stared at it for a long time. It wasn't a cairn or a trail marker. It was too small and too deliberate. I didn't hear anyone while I was gone. I didn't hear footsteps or voices. Nothing. But someone had to have been there. I kicked the stones away and didn't think much more about it until later that night. As I was settling into my sleeping bag, I heard something. Not close, not loud, but I heard it. A soft crack, like a stick breaking in the woods behind the tent. Then silence. I turned off my light and laid there completely still, waiting for it to happen again. A minute passed, 2. Then I heard another crack. Closer this time. I sat up slowly, heart pounding. I didn't want to make noise. I knew better than to yell or panic. I reached for the flashlight beside me and turned it on. I unzipped the tent just enough to peek out and flashed the light in a wide arc across the trees. Nothing, just trunks and branches and dark air. I sat there like that for almost 10 minutes, listening. Eventually, the sounds stopped. I figured maybe it was just a deer or a raccoon. My mind was playing tricks on me. That had to be it. But the next morning, I found something else. Right outside the tent flap, about a foot away from where I had been sleeping, there was a single boot print in the dirt. Not mine. It was too big. I wear size 10. This was larger and deeper, and the pattern on the bottom wasn't from my boots. I checked to make sure I wasn't imagining it. I took off one of my shoes and stepped next to it. It didn't match. Someone had been there. Someone stood outside my tent while I slept. I didn't know what to do. I didn't bring a gun. Just a knife I kept in my pack and some bear spray. I had no cell signal, and the nearest road was hours away. I thought about leaving then, packing up and hiking out, but some part of me didn't want to give in. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was stupidity. But I told myself I'd stay one more night and head out first thing in the morning. I packed everything up except for the tent and sleeping bag, just in case I had to make a fast exit. That night, I didn't sleep. I laid in my bag with the knife in one hand and the bear spray in the other. Every sound outside made my heart jump. Around midnight, I heard the river bubbling and something moving in the bushes behind the tent. It wasn't an animal. It was too heavy. Footsteps. Slow. Careful. Then silence again. I turned off my light and stayed perfectly still. After a few minutes, I unzipped the tent again and stuck my head out with the flashlight ready. I shined it left, then right, then up into the trees. That's when I saw it. Not a person, not clearly. Just movement. The shape of a figure stepping behind a thick tree about 20 feet away. It moved fast when the light hit it. I couldn't make out a face or clothes, just a shape. I froze for a second. My hands were shaking. I didn't yell. I didn't move. I backed slowly into the tent, zipped it shut, and waited. I sat up until the sun came up. The second the sky turned blue, I tore down the tent, stuffed everything into my pack, and started hiking back to the car. I didn't stop for water or food. I just walked fast and kept looking over my shoulder every couple of minutes. I felt watched. I can't explain it. Like someone was always just out of sight. Once, I heard a branch snap behind me and I turned fast, but nothing was there. Still, I didn't slow down. I made it to the car just before noon. I tossed everything in the trunk, got inside, and locked the doors. I didn't see anyone on the way out, no trucks or hikers. Nothing. I didn't relax until I was 30 miles from the forest and back on a paved highway. When I got home, I dumped everything in the garage and sat in my driveway for a long time. I couldn't shake the feeling. I started going through my pack later that night and found something I didn't recognize. Tucked into the side pocket was a folded piece of paper. I didn't put it there. I would have remembered. It was small, yellowed, like it had been ripped from a notebook. No writing on it, just a drawn symbol. 3 circles overlapping in a triangle pattern with an X through the middle. I stared at it for hours. I still don't know what it means. I never went back to that spot. I never told anyone the full story. I tried reporting it to the local sheriff's office, but they didn't care. They said unless I saw someone or was attacked, there was nothing they could do. They told me to stay out of the woods if I didn't feel safe. I've camped since then, but only in official campgrounds, never alone, and never without a signal. I don't sleep deeply anymore when I'm out there. I keep a hatchet under my sleeping pad and check the perimeter 3 or 4 times before going to bed. Sometimes I wonder if whoever it was just wanted to scare me. Maybe they lived out there and didn't like strangers. Or maybe it was worse than that. Maybe they were waiting for me to stay one more night. Maybe if I had, I wouldn't be here writing this. I don't know what the stone pile meant. I don't know what the footprint meant. And I don't know how someone got that piece of paper into my pack. But I do know that the forest isn't as empty as people think it is. And I do know that not all the scary things in the woods are animals. Sometimes they walk on 2 feet.